Speaking about ACT basis and specifically relational frame theory, one of your clinical videos that I love to show during my ACT workshops is the one with the pen that says "Who?" And in your second TED Talk, you jokingly said that almost 40 years of research can be summarized in the little ditty, learning it one, deriving in two, put it in networks that change what you do. How can relational framing be so important for clinical practice and also for people's lives in general and societies?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one where the community really is working on answers like this. I'm kind of yearning for the day when the deep mind people at Google and the artificial intelligence people with and so forth really wake up to relational learning as the core of human language, because I think there's so much that we can do with artificial intelligence and so forth if the core insight in relational frame theory is correct, which is that human language is learning how to relate, not how to associate. We've been on a 300-year journey with associative models in cognition, and they don't yield very much. They do some things, but not very much. And so, seeing this relational process, I think, gives us an opportunity. It also is shocking because it means that this evolutionarily recent ability that we carry within us has almost put us in a place as human beings where our capacities are infinite. The way I often explain this is by the implications of relational learning is that everything can relate to everything in every possible way. And in the RFT book, I do a little exercise. We take two things, we take relations, we randomly put them together, we ask the question, and we end with things like, how is a banana like a car? And you always can come up with good answers, always, always, always. Well, the example that I use, and if you can forgive me if you've heard it before, if you shuffle a deck of cards, which has 52 cards really, really well, the sequence of cards you've done, if you shuffle it well, has probably never been seen before in the history of the universe and probably never will again. Because a factorial of 52, which is how many different sequences there are when you shuffle a deck of cards, is a number with 1 and 67 zeros. 1 with 67 zeros, just with the deck of cards, you might as well say the word infinite. My son, Stevie, exposed me to this explanation. I'll do it quickly. It takes only a minute to say. If you stood at the equator and set your watch so that every second would count down, and you ask how many seconds are 1 with 67 zeros, well, stand at the equator. When 1 billion years goes by, take a step. Keep doing that until you go all the way around the equator. And when you finish one trip, take 1 drop of water out of the Pacific Ocean and keep going. When the Pacific Ocean is dry, put 1 sheet of paper on the ground, fill up the ocean again, and keep going. When that stack of paper reaches the sun, do it 3,000 more times. And that's how long 1 with 67 zeros is if there were seconds. So how many things are in your head that you could relate one to the other? Do you have 52 things in your head? No, you probably have, 500,000 or 1 million things in your head that you could relate one to the other. How many different kind of relations? In a deck of cards, it's only the relation of next to. It's sequence. Is it only next to? No, even in a deck of cards, you could say, was it 2 red ones or a red and a black one? Was it, well, that would add to the zeros. It's not just 1 to 67. Now we're getting more and more and more zeros. My point being, my friend. We have come up with a learning process that has more possible thoughts in your head than there are molecules in the universe. That's an actual fact. You can do the math and reach it. You need a scientific calculator. But so when you're dealing with your client and they're living inside this very rigid and narrow world, they may be struggling just to leave the house, without, doing some crazy obsessive thing, like putting on your socks in such a way that it feels right. And I've dealt with person struggling with OCD, who literally can't drive around the block because they drive around and make sure they didn't run over somebody, or can't leave the room, the house in the morning because the socks didn't go on right, and they may have to put them on 500 times before they can leave. You're dealing with somebody whose capacities are infinite. How they can guide their behavior is infinite. Now, can we find a way with principles to harness the amount of energy and good things that can come from that, even when it can produce things like anxiety, depression, substance abuse, suicide? It can lead to ends that are unheard of in life. I mean, we're the only ones that commit suicide, deliberately taking our lives in that way, purposefully, intentionally taking our lives. That's a human thing. And it's the same relational engine that gives you those suicide notes that say, when I'm dead, I won't hurt. Or when I'm dead, they'll be sorry. Those two things account for like 3/4 of every suicide note. And it is true, probably, when you're dead, you won't hurt. And maybe they'll even be sorry. But meanwhile, you're dead. And so, and 3-year-olds commit suicide. 3-year-olds. This is not sophisticated. This is very simple. This is not Einstein. This is a toddler. So now, what we have in ACT, when you go around the flexibility processes, are ways that you can teach people to relate to thought in a way that is more diffused, for example, or to feel, experience, remember without the domination of judgment, or to come into the present moment and not disappear into the past or future when the analytic judgmental mind takes you into rumination and worry. Or that you can care about things by choice, not just by making logical, linear, verbal decisions. And that you can deploy, your behavior in a way that's planful, but linked in this trial and error way to building larger and larger habits. And that attaches to this sense of self that is beyond categorization, that is beyond evaluation, that is not the object of reflection, but the fromness of awareness that allows you to use this incredible tool creatively. Now, there's simpler ways to do it. I mean, Dave, give an example just to make it relevant. People say, well, yeah, where is it relevant? We can measure just what people say in therapy and predict whether or not they're going to do well in follow-up. There's studies that have looked at how the words come out of our client's mouth in ways that will function as a mediator. Gerhard Anderson and I published a piece of ACT for tinnitus or tinnitus showing that when you start talking about the noise and the difficulties you have, which is the disorder of hearing that I have, too much punk rock and trance music for human ears to stand, so my ears ring all the time. But I never hear it. I'm hearing it now because I'm talking about it. I'll never hear it because I've learned the trick as to how how to deal with things like that in a different way than analytic, judgmental, evaluative language. Well, you can measure that with people start talking about, I'm having the thought that, or I'm experiencing that, or there's a little distance in their language. It predicts that you're going to be able to put a little distance in there, not defensive distance, but healthy distance between yourself as an aware being and the ringing of your noise, of your ears. You live long enough, it's not going to be just the ringing of your ears, my friend. It's going to be aching of your feet and soreness of your back, and it will be the cancer diagnosis that you get, and the heart problem that you have, and the irregular heartbeats, and so on and on and on. I mean, do you know anybody who's lived a really long life who hasn't many? No, you don't. You have many aches and pains. This is part of human life. Yeah. And it's just one example. Are you going to be able to live that part of your life with your full energy and ability to apply everything that you've learned and not be, wrapped around the axle of aches and pains as you age? Just as one example. Well, I don't know. Practice the skills that give you that. So RFT, I think, has more potential for human beings than ACT, but it will be way outside ACT. ACT is helpful there. It can be done clinically, but I think we'll find it more in things like education, establishing sense of self, improving intellectual performance, and so forth. And we have now randomized trials. You can raise people's IQ with training them really fluent relational framing skills. Including the part of intelligence that people say can't change. Turns out you can change it substantially. And we're just starting. We don't know how many. The studies that have come out have only done like 6 months of training with a very small number of relational frames. What happens if you do 3 years of training with a large number? I don't know. Let's find out. Maybe we can really do a lot for fostering creativity or helping people with a sense of self that we've been talking about, that is transcendent and ineffable, but supportive, we know, of living a whole human life. We've never had a relatively adequate, pragmatic analysis of what you and I are doing. And I don't want to be prideful and say that RFT is it, but I do want to say it looks more like it than any other it that I know of, and it's a horse that's worth riding just to see. The clinicians are getting more interested, surprisingly, as geeky and hard it is. Those books on mastering the clinical conversation or using RFT, those workshops, normal line clinicians are beginning to find some value there, really listening with that third ear to how your clients talk about their experience, of being able to catch a little bit about what are the little traps that they're getting into. How can we free them with that, maybe even in our verbal practices with our clients? Never mind the things in education or things of that kind that I think are, in the long run, probably going to be more important as ways to use RFT. Too long of an answer. I'm sorry, my friend. I'm giving very long answers. I'm an old man in my rocking chair, just holding forth.
Thank you for your answers. They are so useful and open-minded, and I suppose that anyone who's seen this interview can be inspired and enriched. Steve, you are the author of 675 scientific articles. If you had to choose, which one would you consider your best work, or at least the one that can represent some sort of turning point in your professional and personal life?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. And nobody has asked me that question before ever. So I need to think about this. I think I would say probably I'll nominate Steele and Hayes, 1992, because it was the first article really to show that relational learning can be thought of as a learned instrumental or operant process, and that it wasn't just stimulus equivalence, which had been identified 20 years earlier, which is a fascinating, wonderful phenomena that if you have any object and then you have a name for it, very young children, 12 months old, hearing the name will learn to orient towards the object. In other words, that you learn it in one direction, but you derive it in two. And that as you get multiple ones of that, if I knew that this was called a cup, that it contained coffee, let's say, I would be able to put coffee with cup, even if I'd never heard the two going before. So you put them into networks, and that they then, alter. If I said, it turns out coffee is actually poison. All the coffee in this house, all the beans, everything you make, it's been poisoned. Be very careful, An evil person came in and did this. I wouldn't then freely do what I'm doing now. Because it would have I could do something like that. Don't open that door. There's a disease in it, and you may, for the rest of your life, never open the door. It could have such a profound effect of changing what you do. And then we're back to that ditty, learn it in one direction, derive it in two, put it in networks that change what you do. But what Steele and Hayes showed is that it wasn't just this relation of this is a cup, or this is coffee in the cup. It's all possible relations, before and after, and inclusion and comparison and opposites and difference and here and there and now and then and on and on it goes. And that with just the right cues, you can relate anything to anything in any possible way. That's how flexible this deck of cards inside your head is, that gives you more thoughts than there are molecules in the universe, at least potentially. So let's use that amazing affordance for good. Let's see what we can do with it. But the first demonstration that we are in that kind of universe, in a pretty tight study with Steele and Hayes, and published in Journal of Experimental Analysis of Behavior. So I'll take that one. It's one that has never been explained by any existing behavioral theory other than RFT. Very easy to replicate. People are replicating it within weeks. Dermot Barnes-Holmes, who became a really major researcher in relational frame theory, when he saw that study, he ran out and replicated it. And within a week, he knew that was right. And it's, ACT was borrowed from other things. And it's put into new things, but, it's part of my history. You can find Gestalt in there. You can find human potential movement in there. You can find, wisdom traditions in there. RFT is a very, very simple idea. Relating as an operant. Defined the way I mean operants, these radically functional approach, the way I was trained to think of behavioral principles, not like billiard balls or dominoes or, things being not an assemblage. I was taught to think of them as a transformational whole. In the presence of this, do this to get that. Under these motivational conditions, behavior, hyphenated, one qualitative thing. That's the way I was trained. The Willard Days of the world, the original editor of the Journal of Behaviorism, or the people who taught me, John Kraftful, for example, not well known, just a professor at West Virginia, still alive, wonderful man. But I was taught to think about things in that radically functional way. And so here's this simplest of all behavioral theories. Just claiming something's an operant couldn't get simpler than that. but it changes our world if that's true. I think we're at the point now where we can say that's true because we have enough studies, but other people think we don't have enough studies yet. Okay, but take it seriously, because if it's true, then here's what we know about operant things. We can shape them, we can change them, we can train them, we can modify them, we can combine them, which means when you've got that child, for example, who is not doing well intellectually, don't give up on them until you actually train this core unit. They don't have a sense of self. They don't show empathy. There's no, persons on the spectrum, for example, who, when something sad happens to even though they have some words, something happens to their parents, they show no emotion. Don't give up on them. Train them in those perspective-taking relations and see what happens. And when we've done that, we see amazing things. We also see things that make us cry. I can tell you this quick story. We were working with a child who couldn't show any empathy, had no sense of self in the normal way. It was, on the autism spectrum. And we're training perspective-taking frames, deictic frames of here and there, and now and then, and I and you. And this person's sense of self starts this more witnessing, noticing, I hear now sense of self starts to emerge. And we're talking to the child's mother and say, how are things going? She says, amazing, wonderful. I'm seeing things I've never seen before. I dropped my plate, my food spilled, and my son said to me, are you sad, Mommy? And she almost started to cry, and she said, he's never shown any understanding of what it's like to be me. And then she's added, but some things are happening that are not so good. He's getting in fights at school, and he's asking odd questions. He's really fights at school? Like, what kind of questions? And she says, he came home the other day and said, Mommy, what does tarred mean? The children at the school have been calling him a retarded his whole life. But just now he has the ability to understand he's being made fun of. He's being called the tard. And his answer is to hit them because it hurts. And it's the same exact skill that allows him to say, are you sad, Mommy? He's aware of her pain, but now he's aware of his own pain in a different way. And the team of students, when the story was told, we sat in our lab meeting and we all cried. Because we knew what we were doing is drawing this person into human consciousness and out of a kind of innocence in which he could have a severe disability and not even know it. He's not there anymore. We've dragged him into a different kind of awareness. And that happened to you, my friend. It happened to me. It happened to almost everybody who's listening to me. And it's that moment when for the first time you could say, am I lovable? Am I good enough? Am I smart enough? Will I be loved? So that's the kind of creature we are, And essentially, RFT creates the problems that Acclaim has to help solve. But and that's an empirical fact. You know, we have a study just came out of Mark Dixon's lab showing that if you use ACT methods with children who don't have relational learning abilities at a high enough level, they don't benefit from them. But when they do, number one, they no longer respond to these more direct contingency ways in the way that they used to. And number two, ACT methods now are helpful. So we are basically creating through our relational training the problems we will have to solve in another way. And so anyway, that's my favorite one because it marked the moment where my tradition, the behavioral analytic tradition, could no longer deny, or even though some still do deny, that something new happened with human psychology. We created something that had never been seen before on Earth. And we've been riding that tiger ever since for the last several 100,000 years. And your ancestors back for many hundreds of generations, but not infinite. You can go back enough where it was no longer like that, have had to face death, face their own limits, wonder if they're lovable. And here we are as psychotherapists trying to heal the human heart.
Thank you so much, my friend.